There's nothing identifiable. There was only the tailplane. There's nothing else that was, and it was a UK badged Hercules that was shot down in the environs of Iraq. So it was off towards the.
Did you find the bodies?
Only one. But
Only one
we had
body.
to account for everyone, which we did.
Do you remember your first operation where it went kinetic?
So I can't really pick it out. I think it was on my second tour. I think it was on my second tour. I mean, it might have been on the first, right? We did quite a lot of operations up into Crit. You know, I can't pick it out if it was there. And on the second tour, you know, it was more about events that started happening. And there were sort of exchanges at breach points and moving to, but we hadn't got particularly coordinated in. We'd been shot at from roofs a lot. You know, it all started, but there was not really any sort of coordinated action against us. And the targets, we started on Al-Qaeda associated targets in the second tour. And that's not because that became our mission and task. It's because we started coming across these houses where, you know, they weren't that often armed, but when they were armed, they were heavily armed. You know, and the main thing that happened on the second tour is our own Hercules getting shot down, which we responded to extremely quickly. And that was a very, very significant moment in that tour.
Your own what being shot down?
So our transport Hercules.
Was
and
that,
essentially
what is a Hercules?
transport plane. So we
Okay.
have specifically trained aviation crews because of the complexity of what they're doing. And at that point, we were moving about a lot. I remember there was, on the second tour, there was a lot of moving around into different regions, contacting other forces, doing bits with them, a lot up to the west, up towards Ramadi. And you could see that funnel, and that's where we started coming across these houses, these groups that were dressed similarly, and mainly I think we were connecting with US forces. I think the most significant thing in that tour, these were short tours, they were about 3 months at a time, and it was our Hercules. So the Hercules had just dropped off and it took off again, was heading for Balad, and it's the time when they were flying low level, and we heard a mayday call, because it goes over international channels as well. So unhelpfully, Sky News reported it, and it was a UK badged Hercules that was shot down in the environs of Iraq. So it was off towards the northeast or northwest, heading towards Balad. I don't know the details about how they managed to shoot it down, other than it was some sort of rocket pack, and the Herc probably was, you know, how. It's very, very difficult to continue to break up your patterns if you're flying in and out with that density and volume of times. But essentially, we got into the Pumas and responded very quickly to this. And as you can imagine, responding to an aircraft crash like that is it's almost perplexing, the scene you come across, because there's nothing identifiable. There was only the tailplane. There's nothing else that was particularly identifiable about it.
Wow.
It was coming in night. I remember there was a fire in a ditch because there was a water-filled ditch, and there was a fire burning on top. And essentially, we'd sort of cleared the area. It's in a very, very difficult area.
How did you insert?
On our helicopters. So we had our helicopters right by our house, and essentially we could get on them very, very quickly, run them up, and we just flew up flight line, found where that accident had happened, that incident. And essentially, if the aircraft is flying about 200 foot or below, and it gets hit, it goes in head first, right? It just tips forward, and essentially it was a very, very complex space. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff on the Hercules that needed securing, and we had to account for the people on board, and that's quite a task, right? And you know, sadly, there's families involved, and all those people were related to families, So I won't go into the details about exactly what we had to do in order to account for them. But I remember a US call sign, a CSAR call sign, responding to the call ourselves. Now at that point, we'd secured the site. We were just looking at it like, where do we start? And we did locate one person, but the rest, there's really no sign of what we were supposed to do next. It's beyond our remit of like how you do this. And when the US call sign, CSAR call sign turned up, it was just, they turned up and said, look, you get on with accounting for your people and securing your equipment, and we will get on with working out how we clear this site up. And I remember they turned up with equipment. I've got memories of them putting on, dry suits to get into the water-filled ditch.
Oh, man.
Even as there's jagged metal in there. And I do remember some birding and things like that. And, with their help, we got back in front of what was really, really perplexing problem. That does stay with you, It's like, so when you were picking up, sending off and saying, look, how much more? That's a really sort of tough experience, especially, a lot of us were quite young. And that's the first time I saw sort of events like that happen.
How many people were on board of that?
So I think it was 10. We believed it was more at the time, but it was 10. And as you can imagine, if you're sat near the bulkhead of the aircraft, it's gone straight in its nose. And in fact, we couldn't find anything that resembled a nose of an aircraft, almost like it had buried itself. So
Did you find the bodies?
only one. But
Only one
we
body.
had to account for everyone, which we did. So that's a tough experience. But, again, when I'm telling these stories, I'm absolutely, completely conscious that those people were members of families. They're in relationships. That's really, it's something that's always stayed with me. As I've gone through this job, the impact is more keenly felt there. And, I always sort of have that consciously in my mindset. And that was a very, very tough night, and we came on. I remember we stayed out there it was into daylight and it became too insecure, too uncertain. So we lifted off having accomplished that. We had to account for people, which we did, and we had to secure all of the immediate, very important equipment. We came off and we left lots of the wreckage there. And I remember we coming off the ground because it was very likely we were going to start getting mortared at the site. They picked up a lot of activity and comms that they're kind of sort of getting themselves together to make it a real problem for us. And you have sort of options there. You can either call in more air and, so I think the decision was, hey, have we done enough here? Do we have to stay here? And the answer was no. So we lifted off. And then we did return to the site. I can't remember how much longer, it may have been the next day. And by that time, they gathered up all of the metal, because it was obviously valuable, and piled it in piles. But at that point, you're looking at sort of useless metal towards people. So that was kind of the event. And that really was the seminal thing of that tour. There's lots of other kind of operations and activity we got on. But that was a really, really significant one that stuck with me for quite a while, It highlights the complexity of these jobs. No one expected that bit. And I think as I go through all of this, all of the operations, you just re-roll. We weren't as busy on that tour as we was on subsequent tours, but the numbers were absolutely huge, and you're just re-rolling all the time. And hardly any of it is sticking out. It's when something like an aircraft gets shot down and you have to respond to that. And you're keenly aware of those people that were killed were members of people's families. And that really, really highlights it to you that there is a big cost to this.
No matter where you're watching Sean Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.